They said I wasn't on the list. I remember the woman at the registration table double-checking the iPad, her fingernail tapping nervously against the screen. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Maybe you're supposed to be seated with the service staff, she offered, too kindly. I wasn't in uniform yet, just a tailored black dress and quiet posture. She didn't know who I was. Neither did my family. Not really. The banquet hall glittered, all marble floors and champagne breath. I could hear my uncle's voice before I even saw him. Loud, booming, like a man who still believed his voice should be the main course. That's what happens when girls play soldier. He laughed, retelling a story he never earned the right to tell. She flunked out. I think. Some intelligence desk job now. Top secret means no one checks if you're useless. I didn't stop walking. Not even when I passed the cluster of cousins. Pearls on their throats. Husbands with political campaign pins still clinging to their lapels. One of them caught my eye, widened hers in confusion, then quickly looked away. I was never supposed to show up. That was the point. They booked my mother's retirement banquet on a date they thought I couldn't attend. They didn't send an invite, just a courtesy mention 2 days before, the kind that says we didn't forget you. We just didn't think you'd come. But I came. I parked 3 blocks away and walked the last stretch in heels that felt heavier than boots. Because I didn't want anyone to say I used my title for valet. I didn't want an entrance. I wanted a presence. Silent. Complete. Unavoidable. You ever stood at the gates of your own family's pride and been told you don't belong? There's a difference between rejection and erasure. Rejection is at least visible, loud, it bruises. But erasure? It whispers. It makes you doubt whether you were ever real to begin with. They didn't see me when I slipped into the coat room. Didn't notice the way I changed slid on the dress blues, adjusted the bars on my collar, clipped the badge, smoothed the ribbons. Every movement precise, like assembling armor in the quiet before battle. There is a ritual to wearing the uniform. Every pin has a price. Every stripe hides a scar. You learn not to flinch at memory. At 1900 hours sharp, the announcer's voice rang out over the ballroom speakers. Please rise to welcome tonight's keynote guests, including several decorated officers representing Joint Intelligence Command, Pacific Division. A few heads turned. Most kept eating, until the doors opened, and I stepped through. The silence was fast, almost mechanical, like a wire had been cut mid-laughter. My heels echoed against the marble like gunshots. 1, 2, 3, 4. My father's wine glass froze halfway to his mouth. My brother squinted, confused, like a man trying to recognize a ghost from a dream he refuses to admit having. I didn't look at them. I saluted the flag at the end of the room and took my position near the podium. Not center, not boastful, but official. And that's when they started whispering, like flies behind linen. Is that she's... I thought she was stationed? She's in uniform. No one knew how to greet me, not even my mother. Especially not my mother. She was seated at the head of the long table, pearls tight around her neck, eyes narrowed with the soft venom of a woman who thought she had arranged the seating chart of her life perfectly, without me. She didn't stand when I entered. I didn't expect her to. It wasn't the insult that broke me. It was the silence. They laughed about me like I was gone, like I had vanished into whatever war zone they pictured when they heard the word intel. I'd read the headlines from the other side of the world while waiting for briefings in bunkers local girl joins military. Family hopes it's just a phase. They didn't know about the night ops, or the analysts I trained, or the foreign language I mastered in 3 years so I could intercept coded chatter no man could break. They didn't know I once delivered field intelligence that stopped a drone strike that would have hit a school. They never asked. And still, They called me a failure in the quiet ways, the kind of failure you don't accuse, just imply. The she's not really one of us kind, the kind that's harder to fight than bombs. So I stood, still, composed, not waiting to be called, not begging to be seen, until the doors opened again. And he walked in. The president. Not a speech. Not a video. He came in person. For 3 minutes, only tight security. Unplanned. Highly classified. A quick stop to recognize a silent warrior whose name is never in the papers, but who rewrote protocols in half the world's war zones. He wasn't talking about my uncle. He wasn't talking about the decorated colonel at table 9. He wasn't talking about anyone they knew. He walked straight toward me. Every eye turned. My mother's hand clenched around her wine glass, and he said, calmly, warmly, clearly, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, it's good to finally meet the woman behind the operation, not under it, not beside it, behind it. I nodded once. Sir. He didn't stay. Just a moment. But it was enough, because when he turned and left, he had already changed the shape of the room, and no one could mock me now without mocking him. They stared. My cousins froze. My brother dropped his phone into his plate. My mother smiled a smile that wasn't real and never reached her eyes. I walked past them, toward my empty seat. I had RSVP'd myself. They couldn't unseat me now. Have you ever watched the people who erased you begin to shrink inside their own shame? That's power, not vengeance, not loud, just truth. A truth you don't have to announce because the room does it for you. They didn't look at me directly. After the president left, their eyes scattered like dropped marbles searching for anywhere else to land but on me, on my bars, my medals, my presence. I took my seat in the front quadrant, close enough to see their confusion, but far enough not to let it touch me. The MC stuttered when he continued. Yes. Thank you, sir. That was quite an honor. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and moved on to announce my mother's award, Civilian Service Medal. 30 years in the Department of Administrative Planning. She'd been competent, dutiful. She'd kept schedules running and egos polished. Her legacy was a pristine HR file. They clapped for her as she walked to the stage. She smoothed her dress, smiled in that perfectly contained way, and accepted the plaque with both hands. She thanked her colleagues, her supervisors, and of course her husband. She did not mention her children, not even once. Not my brother, who managed a local consulting firm and used the word logistics like a shield. Not me, who sat 10 feet away in the dress blues of a lieutenant commander. And that omission, that was her choice. That was her final revision of our family story. I watched her return to her seat, her spine too straight. The applause was already fading when she glanced my way, brief, cold, almost apologetic, like I had interrupted her version of retirement. You know that feeling, when someone pretends you're invisible while the entire room is staring. The whole night was full of moments like that. Like when Aunt Carol turned to me in the buffet line and said, "So, do you ever, shoot anyone? Or are you more of the keyboard type?" Her voice coated in forced fascination, the kind reserved for animals doing tricks at zoos. I didn't answer. I just reached for the serving spoon and moved on. Or when my cousin Lily leaned over and whispered, "Wait, was that really the president? Or was it like an actor impersonating him for morale?" I smiled then, just enough to let her know I heard her, not enough to give her anything else. Silence is a language they never taught us, but it's the one I speak fluently now. I learned it in underground control rooms, when seconds decided nations. I learned it during briefings where a single wrong breath could break operational security. I learned it from the women before me who had no choice but to swallow pride like steel shavings, sharpened and silent. And yet, at that banquet, they mistook my silence for submission. They always had. When I was 12, my mother once said, "You were always a quiet child, not like your brother. He demands the room. You disappear into it." She meant it as a compliment to him, but it taught me everything I needed to know. That in this family, volume equaled value. That boys were thunder, and girls were the pause between. But I wasn't invisible. Not anymore. The whispers had started shifting. I could feel it. Table after table, not loud enough to interrupt the speeches, but there, persistent. They were trying to rearrange the narrative, trying to figure out how someone they never praised had become someone the president saluted. Must have been a diversity push. I heard someone mutter behind me, that whole inclusion strategy thing, as if I had been handed clearance because I ticked a box, as if I hadn't trained with the 4 a.m. frost clawing through my throat, as if I hadn't sat across from warlords who blinked at me like I was an insult to the table, as if I hadn't coded my own protocols when the system crashed mid-operation, as if I hadn't survived. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had to work twice as hard for half the credit only to be mocked for the credit at all? There's a cruelty to that kind of dismissal. It's not loud. It's not even angry. It's casual, effortless. It wraps around your throat like silk and tightens when you speak. They always wanted me quiet, until I was useful, and now that I was undeniable, they didn't know where to place me, so I let them drown in that discomfort. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need a slideshow of my deployments, or my commendations, or the black folders still buried in sealed files back in DC. I had already won, but the moment they realized it, that came later, after the dessert, the speeches, the clumsy jokes about service and duty and sacrifice. After my mother posed for photos with her department, smiling beside people who never knew she had a daughter stationed in Guam during typhoon season, leading a team of evacuees. After my father leaned in toward a group of senators and bragged about the boy's business acumen while conveniently forgetting his daughter's name. It happened when the general walked in. He wasn't scheduled. No one saw it coming. 4 stars, navy, straight-backed, decorated like a museum piece. The room straightened instinctively, like old habits resurfacing from ROTC classes decades stale. He walked straight to me, paused, then held out his hand. "Commander Hayes," he said, "your debrief on Operation Beryl is the most precise tactical log I've reviewed in 10 years. He said it loud enough for my mother to hear. She blinked, twice. My brother froze mid-laugh. My father dropped the last bite of crème brûlée. "Your silence saved lives," the general added. The president wasn't exaggerating, and then he left. No pomp, no pose, just truth. That's what made it cut so deep, because truth, when it finally surfaces, doesn't shout. It just stands, and it leaves them no room to argue. I turned slowly, looked across the table at my mother. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She glanced down, adjusted her bracelet, as if noise could undo the silence that had just enveloped her. I wasn't angry. I was still. And stillness is something they never learned how to fight. So I let the moment settle, let the air shift, let them sit in the new story that had just been written without them. Because I was done explaining my worth, done auditioning for a role in a family that had already cut my scenes, done pretending the medals on my chest were for their validation. They weren't. They were for the ones I saved, for the team that followed me through monsoon and fire, for the young woman who once stood alone on a rooftop during blackout drills, watching flares trace through the sky, thinking they will never know. But I will. That's enough. And tonight was mine. They started lining up for photos, the part of the night where people forget what the evening was really about, and instead, chase proximity. A photo next to the awardee, a handshake with a retired senator, a chance to be near power, even if just in pixels. They didn't ask me to join. Not at first. I watched from the perimeter of the crowd, hands clasped behind my back, the fabric of my dress uniform precise, pressed, immovable. A few glances shot toward me like nervous sparks, some curious, some calculating. None of them knew how to approach me now, because I'd been recategorized. Before, I was the forgotten niece, the girl who missed birthdays and Thanksgivings, the one who chose work over family. Now, I was something else. The one the president greeted first, the one the general praised, the one who wore her silence like a sword. I took a step back into the shadows, just to see who would follow. One did. My cousin Evan, the youngest, the only one who used to send me letters when I was deployed. He found me by the side wall, holding 2 drinks, handed me one like we were just old friends. "I always knew you'd come back in armor," he said, quietly. I raised an eyebrow. He shrugged. "Even when we were kids, you were already somewhere else." I didn't know whether to thank him or warn him. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for stories. He didn't ask what Operation Barrel was. He just stood beside me in silence. And that meant more than any applause. Have you ever had someone stand with you not for what you could do, but because they finally saw what you had endured? 10 minutes later, the photographer found me. "We're doing a group shot of all family members," he said. "Your mother asked for one." I almost laughed. The same mother who hadn't spoken a full sentence to me all night, who had rewritten her entire retirement speech to exclude her children, who couldn't look me in the eye when the general mentioned my name. Now she wanted me in a photo, because suddenly, I was useful again. A badge to pin to her legacy. I handed my drink to Evan and walked slowly to the setup, the white backdrop, the artificial light, the 2 wide smiles. They had already posed by the time I arrived. "Ah, here she is," one of the uncles called out. "The star of the night." The room chuckled nervously, as if sarcasm could shield them from the truth. I stood next to my father. He adjusted his tie but didn't meet my gaze. I waited, and then, the photographer said it. "All right, everyone, let's have the commander front and center." And just like that, everything shifted. Because I didn't ask for that placement. I didn't claim the spotlight. It was given by someone outside the family, and no one could argue without revealing their bitterness. My mother's smile didn't reach her eyes. My brother exhaled like he was trying not to choke on the air. And me, I stood tall, 1 foot slightly forward, the ribbons on my chest catching the studio lights. I didn't smile, but I didn't flinch either. And when the flash went off, the image was sealed. The daughter they forgot. Now the center of the frame. They couldn't crop me out anymore. After the photos, I stepped away again. Back to my quiet. Back to my watchfulness. That's when the old family friend approached someone I hadn't seen in over a decade. She was in her 60s now. Slower. Gentle in a way that felt real. "Your mother never speaks of you," she said softly. "But when I saw the way he greeted you tonight, I knew what I asked. That your silence wasn't distance. It was duty." She held my hand for a moment longer than expected, then turned and left. That was the only apology I needed. And it didn't even come from them. You know what they never tell you about power? It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the sound of chairs shifting when you enter a room, of voices trailing off mid-sentence, of people remembering they once underestimated you and now they don't know how to begin again. They tried. The rest of the night, they tried. My brother asked what kind of boots I wore in the desert. My aunt asked if I ever thought of writing a memoir. My mother, she stayed silent. Until the very end. When most of the guests had left, and the music had softened, and the chairs were half stacked, she came to me, stood beside me, not quite facing me. "I didn't know you were back," she said. I turned slowly. "I was never gone," I answered. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that once braided my hair before piano recitals, that pointed to the door when I told her I'd enlisted. "You could have told me," she said. "Told you what?" She didn't reply, because she didn't know what she meant. She just wanted to reverse a clock she had helped build. "I wanted this night to be simple," she finally whispered, "and I wanted to be invited." I said. Silence again. She nodded once, a stiff, brittle motion. Then she left. No hug, no apology, just footsteps. But it didn't sting, not like it used to, because I no longer needed her approval. The world had already given me something better truth. I stood in the center of that emptying banquet hall, alone, but not lonely. I had my name, my record, my command. They couldn't touch that. They could mock, doubt, erase, but they could not undo. I had stood in silence while they spoke over me. Now, they had no words. And I didn't need any. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Old habit. My body still wired to GMT+9, still tuned to briefing hours, time-stamped coordinates, encrypted pings. I stood at the hotel window watching dawn bleed across the city skyline, pale gold streaks breaking open a sky that didn't know what happened last night. But I remembered everything. The carpeted silence, the photo flash, the way my father avoided my eyes as if I were now someone he had no tools to understand. The way my mother stood at the edge of conversation, calculating whether proximity to me would feel like acknowledgement or betrayal. It was all still with me, not like pain, but like data, logged, processed, stored. I changed back into civilian clothes, black slacks, neutral blouse, hair tied into the same efficient knot I'd worn through 3 continents. As I zipped my duffel, a ribbon fell loose from an inner pocket, navy and silver. Commendation for intelligence contributions to counterinsurgency ops. I paused. I had never shown it to my family, never sent the news home, because back then, I still believed that if they never asked, they didn't deserve to know. But now, I didn't care whether they ever knew, or understood, or spoke my name with pride. The pride was mine, and that's the kind of honor no banquet, no speech, no family script can replicate. You ever earn something so deeply, so brutally, that it becomes part of your bones, and then realize no one else needs to see it to make it real. I checked out of the hotel without a word. No note left. No goodbyes. By the time the first texts started buzzing, "Where'd you go, breakfast?" I was already through security at the base. The guard at the gate saluted. "Welcome back, ma'am." I nodded. Back where I belonged. Not because it was easier, not because it was perfect, but because here, I was seen, measured, earned. I spent the next 3 hours deep in the command center, reviewing briefs, revisiting intel paths, checking team readiness for a new deployment phase. The cold precision of the data soothed something primal. No passive aggression, no eye rolls, no questions loaded with condescension, just action, just consequence, just clarity. But around noon, I was summoned. Unexpected. Office of the Secretary of Defense. Video briefing. High priority. I walked in and stood at attention. The screen flickered to life. He didn't waste time. "Commander Hayes," he said, "we're pulling you into a new joint operation." He outlined the scope. Multinational. Intelligence first. Delicate timing. High discretion. You'll be the senior liaison across both branches. I blinked once. I wasn't on the list for that rotation. Sir. He smiled faintly. You are now. He didn't mention the banquet. But I knew. He knew. They had seen what the others had overlooked. That beneath the quiet exterior, the disappearing girl, as my mother once named me, lived something else. Fire. Structure. Control. He signed off. And just like that, my next chapter was written not by family, but by service. When I left the briefing room, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, whole. Like a thread that had frayed for years had finally tied itself back together. But something unexpected happened next. That evening, as I walked through the common barracks to greet an incoming officer cohort, my phone vibrated with a call from a number I recognized but hadn't saved. My brother. I answered, mostly out of curiosity. He was quiet for a second. Then, hey. I didn't say it yesterday, but that was really something. I said nothing. Let him fill the silence. I guess I didn't realize how high up you were. He continued. I always thought you were like, behind the scenes or whatever. Behind the scenes. He didn't mean it to cut. But it did just a little. Still, I let him talk. I told some of my friends after the event. They were like, whoa, that's your sister. He chuckled, lightly, as if this revelation made me suddenly interesting. Anyway, he finished, just, congrats. Or salute. Or whatever you guys say. I could have hung up. I could have said nothing. But instead, I gave him a single phrase. Stay safe. Brother. He hesitated. Yeah. You too. Commander. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing. But it was movement. And sometimes, movement is enough. The next day, a package arrived for me through official base channels. No return label. Inside a copy of the banquet photo. The one where I stood in the center. Everyone around me smiling too wide. Me still, unreadable, but undeniably, there. Permanently part of the frame. And on the back, written in cursive handwriting that I hadn't seen in years. You were never supposed to disappear. I just didn't know how to see you. Mom. I sat with that for a long time. Not with anger. Not with hope. Just space. Because when someone finally admits what you always knew, it doesn't erase the past, but it releases your grip on needing to rewrite it. I tucked the photo away. Not in the drawer. Not in the trash. In the same folder as my clearance IDs. Not because it was evidence, but because it was, finally, the end of a chapter. You know what I realized? Standing at the top of that mountain of silence and shadow, that power doesn't mean making others bow. It means standing so fully in your own worth that no one dares to challenge it. That's what the uniform gave me. Not revenge, not vindication, but presence. An unshakable presence they couldn't laugh off, erase, or reduce. And when the next operation begins, when the next plane takes off, the next file is locked. The next life depends on my call. I will carry that with me, not as armor, but as truth. Because I was never on their list, but I was on the one that mattered. The deployment order came sealed, classified, and unsigned, just the way they always did. I read it in silence. It wasn't glamorous, no parades, no medals waiting at the end, no headlines. But it was real. Embedded field intel coordination across 3 Allied bases. 2 languages required. High-value assets. Time-sensitive logistics. 10 weeks overseas. Minimal visibility. Full authority. Exactly the kind of operation I'd trained for. Exactly the kind no one in my family would ever know existed. And still, the irony was sharp. The same people who once asked if I was still in that military thing now probably boasted that I worked with the president. They didn't know what I did. They didn't understand it. But now that someone important had said my name out loud, they could repeat it like a trophy. You ever feel your worth finally recognized only after someone else validates it? I used to ache for that. Ache like hunger. But not anymore. This mission felt different, not because of its complexity, but because I wasn't bringing anything unfinished with me. No lingering need to be seen. No unspoken battles with my mother's silence or my brother's jokes. No desire to explain myself to anyone who had already decided I didn't belong. I belonged. And I didn't need them to confirm it. I packed light. Always did. My team knew. No small talk. No fluff. No wasted motion. They moved like clockwork, steady, sharp, trusted. Lieutenant Baker was first to greet me on base. "Commander." She nodded. "Glad you're leading this one." Her eyes held that blend of respect and relief, the kind you only get from people who know exactly how high the stakes can climb before anyone outside notices. I nodded back. "We keep it clean. We keep it silent." That was enough. 2 nights before Wheels Up, I stood under an empty hangar archway, watching the tarmac breathe under the floodlights. There's a hush to military airfields that most people never hear, a deep, patient silence, like the breath before a leap. That's when Evan called again. Not a long call. Just a moment. "Mom told everyone you were consulting for the Pentagon." He laughed softly. "Guess that's one way to phrase it." I didn't correct him. Let them think what they want. The myth is easier to digest than the truth anyway. "You okay?" he asked. It was the first time anyone in my family had asked me that. Not, "Where are you?" Not, "Why didn't you come?" Not, "What do you do again?" Just, "Are you okay?" And I realized something. That's all I ever wanted. Not validation, not applause, just acknowledgement that I was real, that I existed beyond the roles they'd assigned. "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." Because I was. I left the next morning before dawn. No goodbye party, no warm send-off, just protocol, personnel, and precision, the way it should be. The aircraft hummed steady beneath us as we lifted into the dark. I sat in the command seat, headset snug, eyes scanning telemetry as the city lights shrank behind us. There's a peace in flight, a detachment, a kind of clarity that can only come from altitude. Below me, the family I had outgrown. Ahead of me, the work no one else could do. Have you ever felt that shift when your past stops chasing you, and your future finally opens its hand? 10 days into the op, something strange happened. My mother sent a letter. Not an email, a letter. Handwritten, folded with care. It arrived through diplomatic channels, marked non-urgent. Baker dropped it on my desk like it might bite. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The handwriting hadn't changed. Still neat. Still too cautious. Like everything she ever said was pre-edited before pen touched page. Inside, 4 short lines. "I don't know how to say I'm sorry, but I see you now. I see everything. Come home when you're ready." No signature, just her name. Margaret Hayes. Not mom, not mother, just Margaret. Like she was acknowledging I no longer belonged to the story she wrote and maybe never had. I folded the letter. Didn't cry. Didn't burn it. Didn't frame it. I kept it. Quietly. As proof. Not of reconciliation, but of reckoning. She couldn't undo what had been done. She couldn't erase the years of silence, the subtle cuts, the dinners I wasn't invited to, the birthdays passed over like empty chairs. But she could surrender the illusion, the fiction that I had simply drifted away, uninvited, unwanted. And in her letter, she had I never wrote back. Not because I was angry, but because some truths stand better alone. That mission ended clean. Ahead of schedule, minimal loss, maximum impact. We were debriefed in a closed room with 2 red binders and no fanfare. My name was logged, my record updated, my clearance renewed. I returned home to a house that had never been visited by family. A small garden, a single photo frame, a box of medals I hadn't yet hung, and a uniform I folded slowly, reverently, knowing it would rest for now. 2 days later, a formal invitation arrived. A government banquet. Smaller, more controlled, but hosted at the Capitol. Honors for strategic excellence in conflict stabilization. Dress code, full uniform. I considered skipping it, but then I saw the guest list. My mother's name was there. So was my father's, and Evan's. Extended to all families of honorees. They hadn't reached out. But the list spoke louder. They would be there, watching. So I said yes. The night of the banquet, I dressed without hesitation, every ribbon polished, every line pressed, hair tied in a regulation bun, no perfume, just presence. When I stepped into the rotunda, I didn't look for them. I didn't need to. They found me. I felt it before I saw it, that shift in the air when the familiar becomes unfamiliar. When a daughter they tried to forget becomes something unplaceable. I stood at the edge of the crowd. Then, the announcement. Please welcome Lieutenant Commander Hayes, recipient of the National Cross for Intelligence distinction. The room turned, and this time, no one looked away. I walked toward the dais, steady, barely blinking. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake, because this was no longer about being seen. This was about being... I accepted the award, nodded once to the secretary, took no photo. On my way down, I passed my family's table. My father stood, then hesitated. My mother did not rise, but her eyes met mine. And this time, she didn't look through me. She looked at me, and I nodded. Just once. That was all. No confrontation, no scene, no dramatic reconciliation, just silence. But not the silence of being erased. The silence of recognition, of a truth too large for words. I walked out into the night alone, but not empty. And for the first time in years, I could finally say it. I didn't need them to respect me. The whole room already did.